Welcome back to the channel. I'm Joe Potter and this is the Vintage Underground. Today I thought we'd go over a project that we've been deep into for a while, and it's an Aseca. Some folks know what this car is. I refer to it as the hardtop version of a Cobra. When Shelby took the AC Ace to make the Cobra in the States, there was and existed a hardtop version of the car, which he wasn't interested in. So essentially the same car at the time that the Cobra was developed out of, but it never was evolved into that. There have been several instances over time where these cars have been Cobraized, I guess would be a word for it, where a small block Ford was put in them and went on from there. This originally would have had an AC motor or a Bristol, and we don't know which one on this car the engine was missing. When this project came to us, it had no engine. It actually had an AC engine that was in the pile of parts, but it wasn't original to the car. The customer wanted to do a Cobra kind of build on this car, and it was clear that earlier in its life there was a small block Ford mounted in this car. There were motor mounts welded in place for that. So it was very clear it had already been modified once in its life. So that started the project, to do this bespoke build and build a unique car, kind of a hardtop Cobra, if you will. Once we got into this car and we got the aluminum skins off of it, and the skins are just sitting on here right now, both fore and aft, as we do our build on the structure underneath. As we got it off and got into this thing, we realized that it had been more heavily modified than we originally knew. And what we figured out is that early on there were changes done to the AC chassis to accommodate the V8 power. And one of those was in the rear end. And the cage structure and the rear end itself were different. And this car had Cobra welded into it in the back. Same as in the front. We came up with suspension in the front that was clearly off of a Cobra, not an original Ace or a Aseca. And it clearly had been welded on, and not particularly well. So the decision was made to stay with that, and the owners actually researched it down to, they think it's one particular car, one particular Cobra that was totaled in Southern California, which is where this car was, and disappeared. And we think the components that we have found on the chassis of this car are more than likely from that Cobra. So kind of makes this build that much more interesting in that the whole goal was to kind of build a hardtop Cobra, and we end up with early Cobra real components in the car. So that was really pretty cool. So on we go into the build, and right down to the bare metal core structure everywhere. These cars were built with small tubes. You have the two primary tubes down the center, and then just a series of very small tubes that create the structure and ultimately the greenhouse of the car. Very light structure. And a lot of that will fracture and break. We didn't have a lot of rust in this car, but we had a lot of stress kind of fractures. And so we ended up replacing and repairing a lot of steel structure fore and aft. The main primary tubes on these Cobras also tend to move, and the way to deal with that is to line them and strengthen them, and we've done that as well. We've corrected the install to the rear where the Cobra components were morphed onto this Aseca chassis. We've corrected all that and made it much more sanitary and squared it and all that kind of stuff. So we're kind of done with the core structure, and we're starting to do the actual build. Now, this is not a restoration. This is not a straight up nut and bolt type of restoration. This is a build. We're creating something out of components that exist. So it all has to be assembled, and everything has to fit and work together, and that's what we're doing now. So we've got the original front suspension in place, and A-arms and components and front brakes, a steering rack which we have laid in here, and all that has to be made to fit, function, and work, along with the brakes that we're going to use. To the rear is the same. We've picked our the shocks. We've set up the suspension. The brakes, everything's been picked and sourced and inlaid. I don't know if you can see it here, but we have completely fabricated a fuel tank out of aluminum in place of the original. And the reason we did that is we had issues of where we wanted the exhaust to go, and other issues where it just made more sense to create a tank to fit our needs. It looks correct, but it is dimensionally different than what was there. Inside, the customer picked the manual transmission that they wanted. So what's going in the car is a small block Ford, just a standard 302 small block. We will make it look a little bit more vintage, but it's a somewhat modern small block. After that is a TKO 5-speed, and so that has set the available space to us. So the dash and the footwells all then have to fit around that bell housing, and they have to do so in a nice sanitary way so that things are accessible and that kind of stuff. So right now there's quite a bit of time being spent creating this structure for the dash, the scuttle that separates the engine compartment from the cockpit. All this has to be fit. This is not a restoration truly in this sense. We're trying to create all this and make it all work, while maintaining the essence of the build and how they originally were. We're not doing anything that will look out of place. It'll look like a period car. We're not adding modern things or whatnot to really differentiate it. It'll look like an Aseca. It'll look like an aggressive Aseca, but it'll be period. And so you have to kind of consider that when you're doing the build and how you do things. You know, we will use wood floors like they did. The interior will look correct. The seats will look vintage and correct. All that will have to flow and be coordinated. It's a little bit tricky because you're doing a custom build, and it can be very easy to get off track and get into a place where the car loses some of that essence. So a lot of effort is made to maintain the essence of the build during the build, and that we're staying on track and creating something that aesthetically will look like it's supposed to, and from a performance point of view will do what it's supposed to do and feel like it's supposed to feel as a vintage car. When we're done with the chassis, we will have a rolling driving car. The last thing as far as construction goes will be the alloy skins, and we've done some straightening, some rough straightening work on them already, but once we have a valid chassis with wheels on it, we'll do the final fitment of these alloy panels to the car. Once they're fitted, we will then take everything apart, paint the chassis, come all the way back up, and then do final application of the skins. The interface of where that aluminum meets the steel is something that wasn't tended well when these cars were built, and any cars out of that era that were alloy on chassis cars. The interface between the aluminum and the steel often wasn't managed well, and you would get corrosion on both the steel and the aluminum. So we're going to do some things where we are going to use some modern materials to create an interface between those two when the skins go back on and are placed in their final position. I think that's about it. This one is a lot of fun. We really love doing builds like this. They're entertaining and they're really a challenge. Looking forward to getting this one on the ground and really so we can check out the stance and see what if it presents the way we want it to. Thanks for watching. We do appreciate it. Please do like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.